Saturday night, I believe it was, I got the chance to go down to Winsport over, I guess if you don't know where that is, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, to watch a game of the new startup Canadian Elite Basketball League, which I assume not many people have heard of. It was super fun. We watched the Calgary Surge take on the Saskatchewan Rattlers. Calgary won by a pretty significant margin. It was great. It was surprisingly good atmosphere for such a small league, small team, small venue. The fans were great. The play was surprisingly good. Got some great dunks in there. Some great back and forth play, especially in the first half. And it overall felt like a great basketball experience, for which was surprising given how small and startup the league seemed to be. But the biggest thing that caught my attention, and something that I think you can project out to a bigger league like the NBA, is how they ended their games. They used a system called the Elam ending, which, for those of you who don't know, it's something that the NBA has used in the past few All Star games. It's where instead of having a timer for the fourth quarter, the way that they did it in the game that I watched is you play normal basketball game up until about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. After you've gone past that fourth minute, the next stoppage in play, uh, you take the score of the team who is currently winning, you add 9 to that score, and it becomes your target score. And once a team reaches that target score, then the game is over. There's no winding out the clock. Um, a team who's behind can have infinite time to do so, but they do have to reach that target score. So let's say, I think in the game that I watched, I think it was about the target score was, I think, like 82.
79?
Was it 79?
Wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was 79. It was
I
79.
I thought I read it was 79.
It was 79. Yeah, it was 79, which meant that they had 70 points going into it, and Saskatchewan was stuck at like 52 or something. So obviously, huge advantage going to Calgary in that one. But that's kind of how the system's supposed to work, right? Calgary only needs 9 points. Saskatchewan needed um, like a solid 20 or whatever. And I think it's an interesting system. It's one that I really liked, and it's one, as me being more of a casual basketball fan, wondering if it's just me who's more open to some of these new ideas and is more of a longtime basketball fan. Do you like this new system, or do you see it as something that's a little bit gimmicky?
You know what? Normally, when it comes to most things like this, I would be against it. But the more that and if I hadn't done more research into exactly it was as a whole, I would have been probably against it if I hadn't. But now that I've done a little bit more digging, I have a better understanding of it. I can definitely say I'm for it, and mainly because I think it makes the game a lot more interesting. And the whole reason behind it was the begin. If I you could I could be wrong in this. I'm pretty sure I remember reading this, but I believe the reason that it was made in the first place was because when you watch a regular game of basketball, especially in the NBA, in the last couple minutes of the fourth quarter, you'll see it go really slow because they're fouling people and they're calling timeouts and all these different things. And when you throw a timer out of the way and it just becomes trying to get to a certain score, it completely changes the game. It keeps the pace going and it makes it more interesting. And obviously it shortens the games. That's not as important. We're not talking about baseball, but it makes it more interesting, which is something that I'm very for. Like, I think taking out the amount of fouls at the end of the games and the amount of timeouts, obviously it kind of removes, not really, I guess. I was going to say it kind of removes buzzer beaters, but even then you could still be like 2 or 3 points. It could be a very close game where both teams are very, very close to the target score and one team only needs 2 to hit it or something like that, right? Like, you could still have that buzzer beater victory, which personally, your only question there was whether I'm for it or not as a longtime basketball fan. Personally, if the NBA brought this in, I think it would make the NBA way more entertaining. I think it would do a lot for the game as a whole. It would reduce the amount of fouls, which I am totally for, and it would just make the end of the game more fun. You threw in a word there that I think would a lot of fans would probably use against this, which is that it could be seen as gimmicky. But I don't like that. I think that I personally really like. I don't think that just because something is new doesn't mean that it's gimmicky. I like the idea that you can bring in new parts to the game and have it just fit in well because it works and not be hated because it's new. Like there's examples all across sport of new facets of the game being added to certain things. Obviously, to there's been a lot of people against. I'll use two. These are two different hockey things. One getting a lot of bad recognition and one getting good recognition. But obviously, the first thing I'll bring up is the shootout when that was added. People in the hockey realm and the NHL realm, and I'm sure Caleb, you have an opinion on this because everyone does. People don't like the shootout. People don't like that it was added. They don't like it at all. They wish that a lot of people wish that it just probably went to a tie. I know that isn't a controversial opinion, but one thing that people really like is they moved away from 4-on-4 to 3-on-3 overtime, which is instantly was loved because it just instantly made overtime so much more thrilling. And that's one of this change I think would be the same as making it 3-on-3 overtime. You know what I mean? It'd be basketball's version of 3-on-3 overtime.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot to. There's a couple things I wanted to hit on, because I did kind of go back and forth on this in my head. I think there's arguments you can make for it and arguments you can make against it. The idea that there's no more buzzer beaters is definitely something to keep in mind. Like I'm thinking of things like the Kawhi Leonard shot to beat the 76ers. Like that same drama isn't there. There was a game that I went to. The only NBA game I've ever went to. It was Magic Wizards, and I'm sure it's went to that game in Orlando. I'm sure it was a long time ago by now, so I don't know if people remember this or not, but it was a game where there's about 0.8 seconds left, and they were inbounding the ball, and essentially they just threw up an alley-oop to John Wall, and they were down by 0.8 seconds left, and they got it in, and that was insane. Like I've been to a lot of in-person sporting events in my life. I've never seen a stadium go silent as fast as that Orlando stadium did. Because it's 0.8 seconds, you don't think anything can happen, and then John Wall comes in and just destroys that franchise. Like, you are kind of eliminating moments like that. But on the other hand, you can flip it and say, now there's a buzzer beater.
You're going to create way more moments like that.
Yeah.
You can almost argue.
Because, again, like I pulled up the actual scores. You were right. The target score was 79 in the game that I watched. Then the score going into the target score was 70-59. So you're thinking Saskatchewan has to get 20 more points to reach that 79. Calgary only has to get 9. Not necessarily a close game. Calgary dominated that second half. But it was still an interesting game all the way down to that last play. It did end a little bit anticlimactically because it ended on a free throw. But to get up to that 79 was awesome. Like that to get to 78 even. It was a great steal by Calgary that led to an awesome dunk. Like that moment was awesome, and that wouldn't have happened in a regular NBA game. And I think eliminating the buzzer beater is worth it to avoid all of the other terrible endings to a basketball game. So I know as a casual basketball fan, I really like watching basketball, but one of the biggest reasons I can't get into it as much as I want to is fouls, because it just feels like you're shooting free throws more than you're playing the actual game, especially in the end. I get on...
And if I'm going to just jump in there just to reassure this, as someone who... I watch basketball a lot more casually now, but even when I didn't, and I was very, very involved or not involved, but you know what I mean, watching a lot more often, or watching the NBA a lot more often, I had the same issue. I hated fouls. Everyone hates fouls. That's how it is. Fouls suck, because at the end of the game, it could be super close, and then 2 minutes lasts 10, because everybody keeps jumping on each other and not letting anybody get shots off. And then you end up with games where James Harden has 20 free throws, and it's just like...
And I think it's the issue with fouls is, honestly, you brought up the shootout. It's the same issue to me. It's that they're not, to decide the game, they're not playing the sport. And I don't even think it's that it's lasts long, because in the NFL, like I know one of the reasons like my mom couldn't get into football as much is she'd go to a football game and or even have like me and my dad watching, and she'd be like, "Oh, like dinner's ready. Like how many minutes are left in the game?" We'd be like, "2 minutes are left." But obviously in football, 2 minutes isn't 2 minutes. Like
Yeah,
especially in
a
the
lot more than
CFL
two
where the
minutes.
clock stops after every play after
Oh yeah.
3 minutes. Like 2 minutes or after the 2 minute or 3 minute warning, you have like a lot of
You might
game.
have to skip dinner and just see her at breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But that's for me that's not an issue because there is added suspense and strategy in those last 2 minutes. It's not just the
For sure.
strategy of like basically like hack a shack fouling, hoping that someone misses a free throw so that you can come back. It's not that same
And
strategy. It's time
I was gonna,
management.
I'm very happy you pointed that out because, like you said, there's just that level of the game just isn't there when it comes to fouling somebody. It's just not. You don't see that as much from basketball. I think that's the appeal that football has, at least to somebody like me, where I love learning the strategy behind things. Even in basketball, the little things in basketball, I love the strategy side of basketball. But you don't get to see that as much as you do in sports like football. And I feel like I'm maybe a little biased saying hockey, considering I played it my whole life and I'm able to watch it knowing the strategy behind it. But in sports like that, I can appreciate the strategy a lot more than I can in something like basketball. Especially when at the end of the game it's just foul, 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 foul. Which is why I personally, like I said, I am. If they change this, you would not hear a peep out of me. I would love it. I think it would be great for the game as a whole.
Yeah. And I think it would be too, and I think honestly it would get me into watching basketball. I would tune into a lot more games just because of this. Because when I do tune in, it's the fouls that turn me off, like in the main chunk of the game. But then I got even more frustrated, and it maybe it's hypocritical speaking as a football fan because, like
True.
talking about commercial breaks, like football has more commercial breaks than any other sport, and it I like for people who are gonna like dunk on me for making that point as a football the point about commercial breaks as a football fan, trust me, I hate the commercial breaks in football too. If there's anything that my sport needs to improve, it's that. But what football does right is that there are no commercial breaks in that last 2 minutes. You hit the 2 minute warning, you know that's the last commercial break. You're tuning into unless there's overtime, obviously, you're tuning into that last 2 minutes of drama. Normally, when the game is decided, if it's a good game, it's where the game is decided, and it's uninterrupted. And basketball, timeout after timeout after timeout, because you're saving it for those last couple minutes, and it just breaks at the game. I'm watching the NBA Finals or I'm watching the playoffs, and I just like the suspense is there. Like I'm into the game, and it just keeps getting broken up to where I don't care anymore. I don't care anymore when you reach that end of a playoff game because I've already been subjected to like two different commercial breaks because teams have taken a timeout. Strategically, it's the right move. It just isn't right for the game.
Of course.
If you got this new ending,
Like,
in, you would eliminate those situations.
I think that a lot of I think whether it's going to happen and whether it should or I think or you think it should happen is two very different things. Because personally, if you're asking me whether I think that the NBA is going to bring this in, if I were to give a prediction, I would probably say sadly no because of the thing that you said right at the beginning is that even though I don't think it's a gimmick at all. I think it would be perfect. And I think that's kind of what you're saying too. I think it would be add so much more entertainment to the game. But you got to realize that there are a lot of people who grew up watching and loving the strategy that is there around fouling and the end of the games there that would hate it. And a lot of those guys are old coaches and owners and a lot of people who play the game, right? Like, I feel like the chances of that change actually coming is a lot lower than it should be, sadly.
Yeah.
But, I mean, who knows? They did it in the All-Star game. Obviously, doing something in
it's a
the
show
All-Star
they're
game doesn't
interested.
mean anything, but
Yeah,
yeah,
at
true.
least it shows they're interested. And I do think I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think that um, there will be basketball purists out there that will say that this is a terrible idea, and I kind of get where they're coming from. Like if you made a similar change to football, like there's a bunch of reasons why I think a target score wouldn't work in football. I think that would be a terrible idea. I think it's uniquely suited for basketball, but like if you made
Yeah,
a
I
similar
agree.
change, I would be like out of my chair. I would be furious. Um, but I do think something you can compare it to in terms of the rigidity, like this is how it's always been done, so this is how it will continue to be done mindset is in terms of kickoffs. There is a great,
Yeah, okay.
great proposed rule change in the NFL to where there
I am
instead of
really happy you brought that up because if you didn't, I definitely would have. But definitely continue.
yeah, it's so I think I've plugged John Boy's literally every episode of this podcast, but
I don't think you did last time.
Oh,
I don't think you did
I'm
last
gonna
time, but
I'm
before.
I'm gonna plug him again, and there's another. I don't know if we'll get to it, but there's another opportunity where I might plug him later. But I will plug the video that I've mentioned before. Kickoffs are stupid and bad, and I think it's a great video, and it introduces. It was my introduction to the idea that we should eliminate kickoffs entirely and instead replace all of them with punts. You get. I don't remember the specific details, but you get like a 4th and 15, 4th and 20 from your own 25, and immediately after you score, you kick a field goal, you score a touchdown. That's your situation. You get the ball right back. In most situations, because it's so deep in your own territory, because it's 4th and 15, most teams are going to punt. And a punt, by definition, is more exciting than a kickoff. Punt returns are more exciting than kickoff returns. He goes into that in the video. Punts are safer than kickoffs because you're starting at the same line instead of starting a field apart and running into each other. And it also eliminates the need for an onside kick, which we've seen in leagues like the XFL, because you also have the option, instead of punting on that 4th and 15, to go for it, which is a great opportunity for teams to get back in the game. It solves so many issues with the game all at once. It solves player safety. It solves excitement on kickoffs, because who is tired? Like, who actually likes seeing kickoffs go for touchbacks every single damn time? And it also solves the issue of the onside kick, to where if there is a 2-score game in the last 2 minutes, the game is over and you don't really need to watch those last 2 minutes, barring some sort of miracle. Because the onside kick doesn't work as a way to get back in the game. This would work, and it's a similar thing to what I've said before. Given 3 free throws, given the shootout, it's a similar thing. The onside kick is deciding a football game by not playing football. If you give them the 4th and 15, you're deciding a football game by playing football. It solves so many issues, but it is never going to be accepted into the NFL because this is the way it's always been done. And I think
that is the big thing, the big takeaway, I think, right there. Yeah. Just the fact that they won't do it because they didn't do it 70 years ago or whatever, right? Like, if they had done it, like, it doesn't matter if they'll make this game better or not, they just won't. And it sucks, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 2030 we'll see a much quicker ending to most basketball games, which I would love and would bring me back into basketball. Because I can fully admit that I've watched a lot less basketball in the last couple of years because of a lot of the reasons we have mentioned. There's more entertaining things to watch because I don't want to watch people shoot free throws.
Yeah. And I do think, to go to the other side of this argument, I do think that people would be too against it, and it would be too much of a change to actually be implemented. I'll give the NBA credit for being on the cutting edge at least a little bit with new ideas. The whole play-in tournament, that was more of a result of COVID, but they've kept it around, and that is a big new change that I think has worked. I like the play-in tournament.
Now, and they are also introducing the in-season tournament, which we haven't seen yet, obviously. That'll be introduced this season, but to your point, they are definitely doing a pretty good job introducing new ideas that haven't necessarily been seen before on that side. And I think in the NBA it's a little easier because at least I'm a stat nerd in all the sports I follow. That's how I've always been. That's how I will always be. I love stats. It's why I love working color whenever I'm calling games, because I love being able to share stats and just talk about stats. It's my thing, right? The thing that the NBA, when you're adding more games to the season or taking away, the advantage the NBA has is they don't necessarily figure out who's going to win awards or who's going to get what based on the amount of points they scored over the total season, like the NHL would or like the NFL would with how many touchdowns they scored over the total season. They do averages. which makes it way easier to make changes like this without completely allowing either making it impossible to break records that were set previously or making it too easy, right? Because you don't necessarily want to do that. And I feel like an example I could give is obviously Gretzky's point record in hockey. Just because of the difference in eras, it's not like they really changed that many of the rules that would change it, other than goaltending equipment, which I won't get into. But nobody is ever going to touch that record because of the difference in era, which sucks because now we'll never know. But I've kind of gone off track now. But to continue on your point, the NBA does have a unique opportunity with that allows them to. They still can do that. They can lower the amount of games. They can add games if they want to do more tournaments. They can move towards different things if they want to try and like. Obviously, they were inspired a little bit by soccer with the in-season tournament. I think that, like you said, the NBA's just been really good about that, and I think a big reason they have been good about that is because they have a unique opportunity that not a lot of sports or other sports leagues have that allows them to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point to make, because I think that is another argument that would come up against it, and it's an argument that I've seen, again, to compare it to other sports. In football, adding a 17th game to the season, adding an extra playoff seed, you don't have the same standard of comparison. So like players are breaking records. Like I can think of a better example. I should be able to think of a better example, but I can't. So I'll use the example of like
Sacks.
Sacks is a good one, but I was going to use like Geno Smith beating Russell Wilson's all-time Seahawks single season passing yards record.
True.
Like he did it because he had an extra game. Like if you cut it off at the 16 game mark, he wouldn't have. So you don't necessarily have that same standard of comparison. But I do think your point is a good one, and that you can, because basketball is judged differently, you can make that change a little bit easier. And I also think, in most cases, there's a reason they would set it at that 4-minute mark. In most games, you're not going to be playing, unless the last 4 minutes turns into a defensive battle, you're not going to be playing that much more than you already would. And in terms of scoring, it's going to be about the same, right? And the NBA could play with those numbers too if they really want to make it consistent. Like, how many points are on average scored in the last 4 minutes? Then you base your target score on that. Like, you can adjust for that.
True.
Which I think can be an interesting part of the rule change.